Hi everyone, welcome to Women's Week. I hope you enjoyed that song, and if you were here at the very beginning, sorry for the technical difficulties. We're excited to have you for day 2. So real quick, our agenda for today, we're going to do some introductions. We're going to have a group photo. We'll introduce the speakers. We'll have a moderated panel by Dream, who I'll introduce later, followed by open Q&A from our entire attendee list. And then we're going to circle back and kind of reflect on the event that we just had, some of our favorite quotes from the speakers, and any lessons we've learned today. So my name is Nancy Trin. I'm one of the VPs of Operations of MOB's Management Organization for Business Students. Together with President Aditi and co-VP Isla, we've worked together. Say hi to them, they're waving. We've worked together to host a week of events for all of you to attend. Yeah, we're so thankful to have you. And we kind of came up with this idea back in November, and we were kind of thinking about, what we wanted to do in our last semester at San Francisco State. And this quote kind of sums it up. This is from Judith Martinez. She is the CEO and founder of In Her Shoes. And on Monday, we actually did host a networking mixer with In Her Shoes Bay Area chapter. They're an amazing organization whose mission is to make women feel 1% more courageous. But she has this really awesome quote where she says, "A lot of people think being courageous looks bigger, sounds louder, and feels harmless. But some of the most courageous acts we can do look like softening ourselves so that it's so much easier to harden." And I really resonated with this personally because I feel like, in this time, women, particularly women of color, are expected to kind of be extraordinary and really fight to be the best and at the top at all times. But I think in many of those circumstances, we lose sight of our greater network and our greater community and kind of the process of getting there. And so that tends to happen a lot in our careers. So we wanted to build this network of women who join together through professional development workshops and events and breakout rooms to learn together and potentially have a network in the future. We'll be sharing a networking contact list for all of us to stay connected later on as well. I already got that in the chat. And I just want to give a huge thank you to Dream. Dream is a new organization at San Francisco State University, but they're a national organization, which stands for Disability Rights, Education, Activism, and Mentorship. This was founded by Andrea Northrup, who's going to be one of our panel moderators, as well as Azalea. They have just debuted this semester, and last week they did an amazing event with Kathy Martinez, the CEO of Disability Rights Advocates. You can join their mailing list, which Andrew will drop in the chat right now, or check them out on Instagram. And for the events for the rest of our week, tomorrow we're going to have a really exciting event with POW, which is providing opportunity for women. They're another organization on campus that's helped us kind of make this week happen. And they're going to be hosting a Finding Your Passion workshop tomorrow, where you get to network with Hannah, Kayla, and Nicole, and they're all from really niche industries, and join breakout rooms with them to kind of figure out how you can find your passion as well. And hopefully that kind of evolves into a mentorship. And on Thursday, we have an Overcoming Adversity in Your Career panel. And kind of a little overarching thing, we have another member from Co-op, Maria, who's going to be there on Thursday. And one of our panelists today, Adanta, is also from Rutgers. And on Friday, we're going to have a mental health and meditation mixer. For any of these events, please RSVP at the bit.ly here. We'll send out the Zoom links, but we'll send out extra goodies like resource guides, etc., via the RSVP link. And here are some tips for a successful attendee. Just try to learn as much as possible, network with each other, connect with each other through this connections contact list, chat with the speakers before and after the event, participate in the chat, make yourself known here, post on social media, and own your strength and courage. Don't let anything stop you from gaining everything you can from this event. And before we get into the panel, I want to take a group photo while we're all still here. So Aditi, if you don't mind taking a photo for us.
Absolutely.
I'll stop share for a second.
Yeah. Right. Give me 1 second. Okay. So everybody smile in 3, 2, 1. And let's do one more. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody.
So I just want to introduce our speakers for today. We have Adanta, who's from Co-op Careers. We have Alicia, who's from Microsoft, and Tiffany from Diversability. And they're going to share more about where they work, what they do, and their stories as well. I'm going to hand it off to Andrea Northrup now. She is the director of GLEAM at SFSU, and she's going to be moderating today's panel.
Thank you so much for that, Nancy. I'm just going to try to pin our panelists so we can keep them and see them all. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and spending your Tuesday evening with us. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you to Isla and Aditi and Nancy for putting all this together. Surely wasn't easy, but absolutely worth it. So thank you. So first, I'd love to learn about the backgrounds of our speakers. So just quickly, or not quickly, backgrounds in the current position that you guys are in. Adanta, would you like to start?
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, everyone, if you're all in California like I am. So I'm out of Oakland. My name is Adanta Ahanonu, pronouns she, her, hers. And I'm currently the Senior Director of Program and Recruiting for a national nonprofit called Co-op Careers, which is focused on overcoming underemployment for recent college graduates who are first-generation Pell eligible college graduates and supporting them in entering in careers in tech. So actually SFSU is our largest partner. We have over 300 alumni who are SFSU, and we're super excited to always figure out different ways to support and to ensure that we are serving the Gator community. So excited to be here. So just a little bit about me kind of personally. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So I was born to from a Ugandan mother and a Nigerian father who happened to meet in Arizona, of all places in the world. And that's where they had myself as the oldest and my 3 younger siblings. I was someone who growing up was always really driven and passionate about wanting to like be the best big sister possible. And so was often finding ways to like be the one to support my mom and initially carrying my siblings around and then supporting with homework and driving to all their different practices, et cetera. But one thing that was really important to me when I was younger, I grew up as a dancer. And when I was 16 years old, I had a really unique opportunity. I was accepted into a summer intensive dance program in New York City and got a scholarship and had an opportunity to be put on a plane. And my mom said, don't talk to strangers, good luck. And a little Black girl who had grown up in a community that looked nothing like her in Arizona, all of a sudden was propped into New York City at 16 and spent a summer there. That was really transformative for me. That was my first time being in community of all the different dimensions of diversity. It was the first time for me for being a community where folks spoke as fast as I did. So growing up in Arizona, everyone used to say like, I think you belong on the East Coast. And finally I understood that when I was walking and talking as fast as everyone there. But it also made me realize just the possibilities that existed just beyond my natural network of what I knew. And so I ended up deciding to only apply to East Coast schools and was really lucky that through financial aid and scholarships was able to attend college on the East Coast at Boston University. And that opportunity almost didn't happen. So I almost didn't have enough financial aid to be able to make that experience happen. So I took college really seriously. I was heavily involved in campus, like many folks I know who are on this call were as well, or are to this day. And was an RA and a president's host and a dean's host and did the orientation and all the things that allowed me to want to help others acclimate to new environments and new spaces, similar to what I had done with my siblings growing up and in other environments. I ended up studying international business management. I've always been fascinated with other cultures. And when I graduated, like most people when they graduate, you're like, when I grow up, I want to do X. And then you go and you do Y. I thought I was going to graduate and go represent a US company talking about international products. And then I graduated and I went to go work for an insurance company in Worcester, Massachusetts. Very similar. And so that experience, although it was very different than what I initially envisioned, I was super lucky that over time I had gained a lot of different mentors that helped coach me through experiences that to me at the time felt really hard to be moving forward with. So I was in an environment where over the 1,000 staff at the headquarters, I could count on one hand the number of individuals who identified as my same race as a Black American. I was in an environment where most folks were identified as 50 years and up, and I was one of the younger folks in the space. I was in an environment where in the specific department I was in, so I eventually transitioned to the IT department, I was one of the only female identifying folks within my specific area as well. And so there was a lot of times where I felt myself kind of jumping to what I now know as imposter syndrome. But one of the things that I really appreciated is through mentorship and through guidance, I really found my voice and pushed myself to be in those new experiences, which included getting involved with ERGs, which I know we'll probably talk about later, and some other volunteer experiences. One of those experiences involved me mentoring for a national nonprofit called Year Up, and I completely fell in love with their mission. It aligned with my business background and a specific age group that I really appreciated working with from my volunteer experience. And so decided to take a pay cut and make the switch, and eventually transitioned to Year Up, where I spent over 6 years, both leading some of their work for recruiting on the East Coast out of Boston, and then got to move to the West Coast, where I'm based out of now, and launch and lead and grow one of their locations out here. And then now, just a few years later, and a year into COVID, I made a move about a year ago to another national nonprofit called Co-op Careers, which I know we just talked about at the beginning of the call. But that is kind of where I am today, and just kind of a little bit about my journey. So I'm going to pause and see. Am I passing over to Alicia?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Alicia, all you.
Thanks. Yeah, and thank you for sharing a bit of your story. Yeah, my name's Alicia Coll, she, her pronouns, and I am an engineering manager at Microsoft. I am the dev lead for the UX and metrics team in a product called Microsoft Search and Bing. Which is something that lets you log in with your work account to Bing and safely and securely search everything in your life, all your stuff. So the public stuff, as well as, you know, the people or documents and things that you work with. So a little of my background. I grew up in Victoria, British Columbia in Canada, which is on Vancouver Island. And I went to school there at the University of Victoria, and I had grown up with more of a sort of artistic background, performance arts, dancing, acting, that kind of thing. When I came to university, I had a sort of my first year of taking general courses and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I ended up doing really well in the intro computer science classes. And so the department was like, well, do you want to join the program? So I signed up. But when I graduated, I was a little unsure of whether, that was going to be my path, or I had strayed too far from what I had originally wanted to do. And so I decided to do both. And I worked at some startups around Victoria. And in the evenings, I took night classes in singing, and ended up auditioning for the Pacific Opera Victoria, which is a professional company. And I got in with the encouragement of my teacher. So I sang for a season with them, while at the same time I was, doing some programming jobs. And I ended up in a place where my voice coach was sort of like, well, if you want to take the next step with this and, you know, take this seriously and you know, maybe, you know, I could ask for some connections in Toronto, etc. But I had always had my real dream, which was to spend some time in Ireland, where my father is from, and where I have citizenship. And I had been back there once and connected with my family, and always wanted to go back and spend more time. So I just made a snap decision that was going to be for me, and got on a plane to Belfast. I saved up for a couple of years and packed my backpack and got on a plane to Belfast and came down to Dublin. And what I hadn't quite thought through was, you know, it was like mid 2000s Celtic Tiger economy. And I had a job within a week. So I like landed on Monday and had a job at an Irish startup on Friday. And so that was the start of my European adventure. And I ended up living there for over in Europe for over 7 years. And during that time, Microsoft has a big campus in Dublin. And a friend of mine, you know, that I just ran into on the train, had gotten a job there, and he was sort of just like, well, why don't you apply? And you know, my immediate response was kind of, well, you know, are they really going to want me? It's just me, right? And he was like, well, why not? You're really good, right? So I applied, and I got in with a contract position, and it was the late 2000s, and Bing was actually just getting going. So that's where I started my career in search, and quickly fell in love with. It's just such a super interesting area. Because I was on contract, I had a bit of flexibility. I worked as a remote worker. So I moved around. I lived in London, England for a while. I lived in Poland, in Warsaw and Krakow, both of which I'm very fond of for different reasons. And then I came back here to Seattle, where I'm living now, and joined Microsoft full time, and worked for a while in a really interesting area called Knowledge Graph, which is sort of this database of facts. And it's sort of the technology that powers stuff like, well, Cortana, which I worked on a little bit, and but things like Siri or Alexa, when you ask them questions and they have answers, it's consulting the knowledge graph. So it's a super interesting area. And from there, one day I got asked to build a demo of this idea to, you know, be able to search your work stuff and everything else all in the same place. And I thought that was interesting. So I, you know, hustled, worked really hard, put a demo together. That went well. And, you know, one thing led to the next, and then it became a funded project. And over 6 years later, it is a released and public project. We have millions of users. It's growing fast. It's a super big org. You know, I love my team. Love my team that I get to manage. Yeah, so that's my story. And then along the way at Microsoft, I was really supported and helped by the ERGs. Been helped so much, you know, by the queer and trans community in Seattle in general. But at Microsoft as well, there's a very tight trans community, and I wanted to, you know, see if I could do my part to give back a little bit and recognize that Bing didn't have actually a chapter of the LGBTQ ERG, which means Employee Resource Group. And so I asked around, it's like, well, why don't I just found one? Like, can I just do that? And they're like, go for it. So yeah, that's going well. We have, you know, dozens of members and got events on the schedule and getting to know each other. And I've also gotten back involved with the university recruiting pipeline. So it's been great to sort of get connected with diverse students again. I've gotten involved in women's mentoring circles at Microsoft, which are very active. I participate in them. I've led them in the past. There are some women that I mentor. And so there's just so many opportunities, and it's been a really enriching experience for me.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And I love how both of you so far have had a little bit of artistry in your background, vocals and dancing. That's beautiful. Tiffany?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany. Pronouns are she, her. For those who don't have access to see the screen, I'll just provide a brief visual description as well. So I'm an East Asian woman with long black hair, and I'm wearing like a gray white patterned dress. And I've got this very purple mobs background behind me. So I thought I would frame my introductory remarks in terms of a question that one of my friends, Jennifer Brown, asks on her podcast, which is, what is your diversity origin story? And I think that origin stories are really important because they help frame the lens through which people move about the world. So I'm going to start with like a pre-diversity origin story and then go into the actual origin story. So I know someone mentioned that they shared my TED Talk, maybe in the registration or something. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I'm the daughter of a Taiwanese immigrant and a refugee from the Vietnam War. That will make sense later on. So I'm first generation, the youngest of four. And at the age of 9, I became disabled as a result of a car accident that also took the life of my dad. And in Asian cultures, death is very taboo, disability is very taboo, and trauma is very taboo. So by taboo, I mean, you literally do not give those things any breath. So I spent 12 years after I became disabled, not telling anyone. I wore, so one of my arms is paralyzed. I wore long sleeves all the time. And I literally just went around with my passing privilege, pretending that I was a non-disabled person and my dad was away on a trip and I was just fine. And so yeah, I've actually given 3 TED Talks now, but the latest one is about what I call internalized toxic positivity, which is when we are going through really hard things, but we don't acknowledge the gravity of a situation and how that actually has detrimental impacts on our own mental health and well-being. So anyway, so I wanted to provide that because that's actually my disability origin story, but my diversity origin story happened when I was a freshman in college. And while I was there, I met someone who was Taiwanese American, and they said, I'm Taiwanese. And I said, I'm Taiwanese too. And then we were like, we should start a club. And I think what's interesting about that story for me, you know, and this is how GLEAM came about, likely. I always think, you know, I love university environments as a way to really experiment and better understand identity. And so being Taiwanese, you know, I think to the US, not recognized as a country, my ethnic heritage was something that was also kind of fluid, like who was Taiwanese or not, and depending on, you know, which political party they were part of would determine if you were from the mainland or if you're from Taiwan. Anyway, so I started to learn about the complexities of identity through the creation of that club, because when we started the Taiwanese club, the Chinese club was like, we got Hong Kong and Taiwan covered. We don't know why you're creating a Taiwanese club. So that was just a little bit of a fun story. My background is in finance. So I worked on Wall Street for a few years. I was at Goldman in investment banking, because that's what you do when you study finance. And while I was there, I started getting invited to a lot of events for women and Asians through their employee resource groups. And I was like, why am I being invited to these roundtables? Because I had never actually thought about the fact that I was holding these multiple, what could be seen as these multiple oppressed identities. And so, so all of that was kind of trickling through during my summer internship on Wall Street in investment banking. And when I went back to school, I started to really think more deeply about my identity. And what it made me think about was I participated in an activity where you had to cut out 8 slices of a pie based on how important the big 8 aspects of social identity were to you. So if you're unfamiliar with what the big 8 are, it ranges from age, socioeconomic status, religion, sexual orientation, gender, race, nationality, and disability. And that was the first time that I had ever seen disability framed in an identity pie, because my disability to me had always been framed through oh, this is your medical diagnosis, you go to physical therapy, or here are surgeries you can try, or it had always been framed as a shh, don't talk about it. And I was like, are people going around telling me to be like, shh, don't tell anyone you're Taiwanese, or like, shh, don't tell anyone you're a woman, right? And I started to think really more deeply around what it meant to be disabled as an identity, and to be proud in that identity. So my senior year of college, now with my full-time offer to go back to Goldman in hand, I was feeling on top of the world. And I said, there are no clubs on this campus that address disability on a peer level. There's Best Buddies, which is a really great organization that creates one-to-one friendships between students who are non-disabled with partner organizations, and their beneficiaries who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. But what about those of us who are disabled who want to meet other disabled people? So in the beginning, this is back in 2009, our tagline was that we wanted to start a movement around disability pride. And 2009 is actually the first time I told anyone about the car accident publicly. So it's been interesting because now I've been disabled for 24 years, and I spent half of that time not telling anyone and half of that time really growing into, I think, the person and the identity that you see now. And so I wanted to bring up this movement around disability pride because when I started, my organization's called Diversability. When I started Diversability and I was telling other students on campus about it, they were like, we don't get it. What is disability pride? Because how can you be proud to be disabled? And it really made me think about how much ableism is embedded within how we think about disability, right? Because I live in a disabled body, I'm broken or I'm less than. And, I've spent the last decade plus trying to unlearn that to say, disability is just disability. It's not a flaw, it's not an imperfection, it's just a neutral to empowering thing that I live with that impacts the lens through which I move about the world. So after a couple stints at Goldman, I also co-founded Bloomberg's Employee Resource Group for People with Disabilities. Then I ended up working at a company that was co-founded by P. Diddy called Revolt TV before moving into entrepreneurship full-time. And I'll call it hybrid social impact entrepreneurship / disability advocacy, because the reason why I say entrepreneurship is we at Diversability, lots of advocacy work pays $0. I just want to be upfront about that. And so in order to actually create a sustainable business, we needed to figure out a way that we could marry the things that we were doing on the advocacy side and on the grassroots level with how can we turn this into a viable business opportunity. And so our key selling point is the fact that I and many of our community members have worked in corporate. And so we're not going into the corporate saying, you're doing all these things wrong, we're going to call you out. But instead we're saying, hey, we were once in your seats. So how can we make sure that you're viewing disability inclusion as part of your diversity, equity, inclusion strategy? Do you know what ableism is and how pervasive it is in society? What are the things that we are doing that are contributing to a culture of ableism that we're living in? So we had the honor of participating in Facebook's Community Accelerator program last year. That made us feel super legit, even though I've been doing this for 12 years. We won pitch day, which made me feel even more legit. And so I just, I've been thinking recently, Tiffany, why am I so happy? And it just feels so liberating to be able to be yourself. And so with that, I will close my thoughts. but I guess I want to add that I feel really grateful that, you know, on a panel about diversity and equity and inclusion, I often joke that disability is like the distant cousin that's trying to get the invite to the family reunion. When really, when we think about it, disability intersects with every single identity group and every single social justice issue. And if we're not centering on access in the things that we're doing, then we're really doing a disservice to anything that we're trying to build. And this is like access in all of its forms, you know, both from a disability and a non-disabled perspective. So those are my thoughts. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, all three of you, for those introductions. Wonderful to hear all your stories. So first, still kind of touching on background, our first big question, and we can go around, or you can do opposite order, however you want to do it. The first big question is, and again, some of you already touched on this a little bit, but what diversity and inclusion initiatives are you most proud of, either that you have worked on in the past or that you're currently working on? And what are they? What have you done?
I'd love to share just 3 things really quickly, if that's okay. So number one, and we just submitted it today, but so much of the way that we think about like if we ever have questions about terminology, we turn to the dictionary. And if you look at the definition of dictionary in the disability, it is just like bleeding with ableism. It's saying we're limited and impaired. And I think that I really see disability as the fact that I do have a condition of my body or mind, and it does impact parts of my life, but where the limitation comes from is from other people's social attitudes and from systemic oppression. So one thing I'm working on that we just submitted today is we want to get Merriam-Webster to add systemic limitation to the definition of disability. There are already 6 definitions in there. But if they don't, even just to link it to the definition of ableism, because I think people aren't realizing that that's actually a thing. So that was number one. Number 2 is, I think co-founding Bloomberg's employee resource group was something really exciting. I was in my early 20s at the time, and to be able to work with the chief diversity officer and have our pitch deck presented to the CEO and COO for the reason why there needed to be an employee resource group for people with disabilities. And it still exists. And Peter Grauer, who I think is the new president, still goes around talking about this ERG and how proud he is of it. And so that was number 2. And then number 3 is last year was the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And here's an example of another form of advocacy and action. I wrote a letter to our mayor. I'm in San Francisco, so I wrote it to Mayor Breed. And I asked her if she could declare July as Disability Pride Month. And in the letter, I explained where Disability Pride came from and why this was significant and why it was important. And she signed the proclamation. And I don't know if anyone saw it, but on July 26, 2020, City Hall was lit in blue and white. That was also something that I got to work on. So, I didn't close the disability employment gap or, create tons of affordable housing and accessible housing. But I think it's those little things. It's like, how can we view that there are issues, lots of systemic issues, but also just the beauty that exists in the 26% of us that exist here in the US.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Alicia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, incredible is the right word, I think. For me, proudest diversity and inclusion initiatives that I've been part of, well, one would be the LGBTQ+ group at Bing. Some other ones, expanding on in addition to the ones I mentioned from my background. One is, I'm proud of Microsoft for some of the focus on accessibility. That's something that we have on my team. I'm developing the user interface, so I need to make sure that what we're doing is inclusive. So we always have lots of reviews and make sure that everyone can access this product. And another is just this project that I'm working on that has come to span the world. We're working now with not just people here in Seattle from all over the world, which is always such an interesting and great honor, but teams all around the world as well. We've added some developers in Africa and South America recently. So we have people going on every continent except for Antarctica. I don't know if there's any good developers down there, but it's really just such a great experience for me to get to work with all of these different cultures.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. Those are also exciting things. Adanta.
Awesome. So I'm going to share a few things that are more internal to our organization that we're focused on right now that I'm excited to be a part of. And I say a part of because we have an amazing team of individuals who are all collaborating on a lot of these efforts. So one is, and I'm curious if this kind of resonates with folks, but often people assume you're a nonprofit and you're focused on doing good work, and therefore you must be brilliant at DE&I work. And I think the reality is that that's not necessarily true, that every single person needs to do the work, whether you are a corporate organization, a nonprofit organization, a private foundation. And so Co-op Careers is currently about 5 years old, or about to be 6 years old. And one of the things that we have done really well is build phenomenal peer connections amongst our co-opers. And so the community is incredibly strong, and folks rely on that community as they are thinking about growing their career networks and thinking about how they're growing to organizations like Microsoft and Google and onward. And as we are growing as an organization, one of the things that we started to realize and surface was we have work to do as an organization to understand where we currently are as an organization in our DE&I journey, so our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. And then also, where are we as individuals within the organization on our DE&I journeys? Because obviously there's a spectrum of what people's experiences are. And that's not something that we had kind of done that pause to have a really hard look to understand what are our partners who are working with us saying about us? What are our both corporate partners and community and college partners saying? What are our internal staff saying? What are our alumni who come back to work for us saying? What are our students saying? And so just last year, we went through a discovery process with an amazing organization based out of New York called College Code, and really started to do a lot of digging and surveys and focus groups and conversations to understand where are we thriving, and both as an organization, as individuals, as it relates to different dimensions of diversity. Where do we need support as an organization? And what are the steps and action items that we're going to take? And I think one of the framings that we've been really focused on, and something that I'm really proud of continuing to elevate and push into the space, is as an organization, right? When we talk about wanting to strive to be an anti-racist organization, we cannot be an anti-racist organization unless the individuals within the organization are demonstrating anti-racist practices. But at the end of the day, does everyone within the organization even understand and have the shared language of what it means to be anti-racist and what is an anti-racist policy? And so there's obviously all these terms that are obviously thrown around all the time. And what we are currently working on is how do we define and have really shared language as an organization of what we mean when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion? What do we mean when we say we're striving to be an anti-racist organization? What are individual practices that each of us are reflecting inward to name that we are in a space where we can then elevate and push against specific policies that exist. And so we currently are now that we've finished the discovery process and we've gotten all the results and information and recommendations and feedback back. Now I'm on a team who's focused on how do we use that information and really outline what our D&I vision for those organizations is going to be. And then how do we start to embed specific line items into our functional goals, into our individual goals? What does it look like to have warm-up questions that are specifically focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion? What does it mean during this month of Women's History Month and Social Work Awareness Month? What does that mean to elevate that into the space? And so just being a part of those conversations, understanding what are going to be our key performance indicators to ensure that we are making progress and moving towards onward progress, because again, there's never going to be a destination. That is just a project that I'm currently really excited about to be a part of the growth that our organization's taking on that D&I journey.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love what you said. I mean, you can't know where you want to go until you know where you're at, especially in large organizations. So that's amazing. So for our next couple of questions, just for the sake of time, I'm going to invite you guys to jump in. So whoever wants to take it and start and add in, feel free. What can allies do, and how can allies help hold society accountable so that we don't have to do all the emotional labor of dealing with everything?
This is Tiffany. I'm happy to chime in first, and then probably for the next question, I won't chime in first. I came across a tweet recently that's really gotten me thinking, because at least, you know, and I'm going to answer all of these questions from a very disability-centered lens, even though I understand I hold other identities that would be counted under diversity, which is, and the tweet said this, it says, "If you are uncomfortable with my disability, please just tell me, and do not stay silent. Because by just naming the discomfort that you feel around my disability or my disability experience, that really opens up a conversation for both of us to be able to tackle ableism together." So the reason why I bring that up is because literally, like, all of us who are going and doing disability trainings are like, when in doubt, ask questions. Please ask me questions, ask me questions, ask me questions. Like literally the number of times I say, just ask the disabled person. And then the non-disabled ally does not, you know, so the barrier is not the disabled person. Again, the problem is always ableism. But the problem is that we feel so uncomfortable and we're so afraid of being wrong or getting things wrong that we're just not even confronting the fact that ableism is like literally right in front of our face. So that's a little bit more of like a rudimentary foundational thing. But even, you know, even having done this work for over a decade now, I guess I'm starting to realize that I can go around and be as proud as I want to be and as open about my disability, and have that invitation open to my non-disabled allies to come and engage with me. But I know that at the root, or what I'm coming to understand, is that some people just are unwilling to confront their own ableism. But I think to Adanta's work, like, we're all like, we've all got some internalized racism, some internalized, we got all the internalized isms, because that's what that's the society that we're living in. So we have to actively like unlearn these habits. And we're not bad people because we might believe those things, right? Those are so deeply embedded from what our parents taught us or what the media is reinforcing. So again, I think it's, anyway, I said the point, so I'm just gonna stop talking now.
No, I love that. And that's so important. Adanta or Alicia, did you guys want to hop in? Got you. Azalea?
Yeah, that was really powerful. Thank you for sharing, Tiffany. In terms of yeah, how to show up, I think there's a couple things I could point to. One thing you can do is just be a friend, right? To just be kind. If someone you know, in your environment, let's say the workplace, comes out, you can, you know, count on the fact it's a vulnerable time for them. And so what can you do? You can just do what anyone would do if you're being nice. You could invite them to lunch. Ask how their day is going. It doesn't have to be about anything in particular. It doesn't have to be about their journey. You can just chill, and even if they don't take you up on your offer, you know, it's okay to do that. And other things, you know, I tell people when they ask me this is in terms of how to be an ally. So maybe sometimes it can help to ask yourself what would you do in certain situations? If someone's making fun of my pronouns and I'm not around, well, what would you say? Or you know, if someone came out to you, would you know, do you feel like you'd be at least a little prepared for that, or how to respond? And if you don't know the answers, or you're unsure, then you know, there are great resources probably in your environment, in your school or your workplace. There's usually workshops for allies or groups that allies can join. And even, you know, even if you drop in once or twice, you probably will learn some things that are useful. And for me, the important thing, you know, that I try to remember is you know, how I can be a good ally as well. That, you know, that's my responsibility as well.
That's great. Thank you, Alicia. I love those examples that you just shared. I think just to add on to what Tiffany and Alicia just said, I think maybe 3 things that come up for me. One is just reading. There's like so much out there. And I remember, I think it was like last July or August, a friend reached out to me and said, hey, no, there's a lot happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I want to be an ally to you. What can I do? And I recommended 3 books that I encouraged her to read. And her immediate response was, oh, actually, I don't like reading books. What other things do you have for me? And I was like, what? And so I think that one thing I would name is, like, even if you don't like reading books, it's a lot harder to live under other circumstances and dimension diversity. And so that's the hardest thing that you have to commit to. And you want to be an ally, like that's something I encourage you to do. So I think that's one piece, is like, as you all know, like there's so many resources out there on some of the most impactful books to read, or articles to read, or TED Talks, Tiffany's to watch. So encouraging folks to consider that. I think another, so when I was at Europe, we went through a D&I journey as well, and worked with someone named Kevin Fong, an incredible human. And one thing they spoke a lot about was this idea of like turning to wonder. So if someone has an experience in you, how do you, instead of immediately like getting defensive, or you're kind of shutting down, how do you be open and turn to wonder? To wonder what experiences they've had that have shaped their perspective of X, or I wonder what experiences they've had that have made them believe Y. And that's a framework that I think can be really helpful in terms of being an ally, is with a lot of the hate crimes that have been happening here, with our AAPI community, especially in the Bay Area. Instead of folks jumping and saying, I don't understand why people are so upset, why is this so frustrating? Instead of thinking, hey, I wonder why someone might be having that reaction to what's happening in the Bay Area. What's the history that's existed in this space, and how might that be impacting? So I think that's another one that comes up for me, of how to be an ally is turning to wonder. And the last thing that just elevates something that Alicia already said as well, is just around like, in the moment when you experience a microaggression that, or let me take that back, when you observe a microaggression, are you sitting silent, or are you speaking up? And there's a quote that I'm not gonna get right in the moment, but essentially what it says is, you know, if there's an elephant who has its foot on like a mouse, and you're just like staring at the mouse, like the mouse is not going to appreciate your neutrality. So like if you see someone who is being impacted a certain way and you're just being neutral, like that is not helping in any way, and you are not being an ally in that moment. And so what does it mean in moments where you observe microaggressions? How do you ensure that you are speaking up and utilizing your voice of privilege, and whatever that privilege might be in that moment for you?
Great. I love that quote. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the exact quote either. So we have one more question before we move into more open Q&A with the audience. So for this one, it's more related to those of us who do identify as having a more marginalized or oppressed identity or identities. Are there any strategies any of you would recommend for boosting our own self-confidence or self-advocacy skills? And again, you can just jump in, the 3 of you, whoever wants to jump in first.
So self-advocacy, yeah, I think like it's been brought up here, there is an emotional labor to it. So I, think it's it's fair to say it's, you know, what you're comfortable with. But it is also the way I, you know, always see that is, again, you know, I've possibilities have been made more real for me through the work of others sharing their story. And so that inspires me to do that as well. I actually attended you know, through the ERGs that I'm a part of, got to participate in a storytelling workshop. And I use that as an opportunity to sort of work on, you know, how to learn how to tell more of a compelling story or hit the points that I want to make. And so, yeah, that's something that worked for me. Just an opportunity that happened to be in my environment.
That's great. I'm happy to go next. So I will share maybe 3 things that are more focused on, at least for me, that have helped self-confidence, which then maybe translates to self-advocacy. So one is around having a gratitude folder. So this is something I was introduced to from doing a mindfulness session several years ago. And the idea of it was having a gratitude folder where when you receive something written or a message, I keep that in a specific like physical folder. And I'm very terrible at keeping things in a physical space. And so I thought, okay, why don't I move this electronically? And so essentially in my personal email, I have one of my folders, it just says gratitude. And so anytime I receive an email or a text message or anything that feels good to hear about something that I've done or that has impacted someone else, I forward it and put it under the gratitude folder. And so 2 things. One is we all have bad days. When I'm having a bad day and like I'm failing at my job, like everything's horrible, I will go to that folder and it's a great reminder for me of why I do what I do and also the impact that I'm making. Number 2, it allows me, if I'm thinking about my own growth and my next steps in my current role or future role, and you're about to write that cover letter or resume, you're about to go in an interview and they ask you, what are some of your strengths? I can go back to our gratitude folder and remember, oh, what are some of the strengths that people have highlighted that how I've impacted them in the past? So that's one that has actually helped my self-confidence over time and then also helped translate to my self-advocacy because I'm also reminded and of the areas where I'm providing strengths into the space. The other is I'm a big person of doing vision boards at the beginning of the year, and I tend to, I'm very visual in what I see. And so like I can see my vision board right now from where I am. And that allows me to, when I'm looking at that every single day, it boosts my confidence and centers my focus in terms of what I want to achieve. And so it's easier for me to then advocate for the things that I know I want to achieve in the current year. Whether that's like, I told myself I want to do more hikes because I'm sitting all day at Zoom and I'm seeing that thing that's telling me I need to do more hikes. So I'm going to tell my partner, my family that it's time to go and do some hikes, or if it's something more work related. So that's something that's been really helpful for me in terms of self-confidence, but particularly self-advocacy, knowing visually what I want to do. And then finally, and this one might seem really silly, but just I subscribe to Project Happiness. And so every day I start my morning with a motivational quote that comes into my email. And again, in a world where there's so much, especially often negativity coming at us, this allows me to just be centered, start my morning centered every single day, which allows me to go into the day with more self-confidence. So those are things that I know are less focused on our D&I conversation, but are just more personal to me that have been really helpful in my career. And Tiffany, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, this is Tiffany. I love those. Those were super tactical. I have like the poster board or whatever for my vision board and the magazines, but they're just both blank. Well, the magazine, the pages are still in they're just sitting next to each other. So I have a couple tactical ones as well. I'll also do this list of 3. So one is I just discovered this playlist on Spotify called Songs to Sing in the Shower. And I just like and so I've been living by myself. So it's been a year now of me in my solitude. I don't feel lonely, but I am in solitude. But I've been just having dance parties with myself, and it's just like an instant mood booster. And I want to bring up, I thought Adanta, really brought it up in the sense that like our work, because it's so tied, for many of us, it's so tied to our identity, that is even more emotional labor that we have to carry around. So and this ties into my second one, I feel like I'm like the weirdest person I know. And I mean that in like the most endearing sense, because I just want to be goofy in the times that I'm not working. And I have an acronym that I call PFJ, Play Fun Joy. And in addition to, you know, the Spotify dance parties or whatever, how can I find these moments of play, fun, joy? Is it tuning in on TikTok? Is it getting out into nature and reconnecting with the world that way? Is it, you know, going skiing or going on a swing or something? So really, or is it painting? It's kind of just really thinking through, okay, what does inner child Tiffany need? And then the last thing, which does tie more into advocacy work, is I remind myself, I often ask myself the question, like, who wins, who loses when I don't speak up? And who wins when I do? And oftentimes, and I have a lot of other friends who run, you know, large Asian communities and other identity groups. And it can be so easy. And when you're a community builder, there's lots of egos in there. Everyone's got opinions. But what I remind and so I often get the question, you know, Tiffany, what do you do when you're so frustrated and you're dealing with all of these community dynamics? And I'm just like, I remind myself that the message is larger than the little tiffs that are happening right now. And as long as I am living with integrity and speaking my truth, and instead of judgment, I use curiosity. I think Adanta mentioned that earlier when we were talking about allyship, but yeah, I think it's just really, how can I just live as the best version of myself possible, knowing that I'm going to make mistakes, and then use those opportunities, those mistakes as an opportunity to grow. But then understanding that the broader mission of what we're all fighting for, even if we disagree, is more equity and justice and liberation for all of us.
Wow, that's amazing. Can't take care of others until we take care of ourselves, for sure. So we're gonna just take maybe 10 minutes to do an open Q&A with the audience. So of course, feel free to drop it in the chat. If you would not like your name to be read for whatever reason, feel free to direct message Azalea or I, and we'll honor that. And let's just take a few seconds if anyone wants to come off mute and use their voice to ask their question. I'm going to stop talking now to allow you to do that.
Sure. I had just a general question for the speakers. Do you feel things are getting better on this front on D&I, or are they getting worse? I mean, that's something we hear all the time from the media, right? People say, oh, things are getting worse. I personally feel things are getting better, but you know, what's your sense, you know, since you guys have been working specifically in these areas for a long time?
This is Tiffany. I'm happy to start. I mean, I think so. I just feel so. I agree with you, Sharad. I think I heard a quote from another disability advocate a couple years ago who said, "Now is the best time to be disabled," and that was probably 2 years ago. And now is the best time to be disabled. You know, if anyone has taken an improv class, I view everything through like a yes and lens. So it's the best time to be disabled. And even though we've had our rights protected for 3 decades, the unemployment rate for disabled people is still 60 to 70%, which highlights to me, and oftentimes, you know, when I do work with clients, I say, and I adapted this from another DEI advocate, I go in and I say, I'm not here to change policy, I'm here to change hearts and minds, because we do have a policy in place that is supposed to protect our rights, but there is still rampant discrimination, racism, ableism, sexism, over and over and over again, right? So again, it's, yes. Oh, I see like an iPad or something. Oh, maybe you're trying to take a picture. Sorry. I thought you were trying to like send us a message that we had like 5 minutes left. But yeah, things are great. I mean, I feel, at least in my work, I feel, you know, the beginning of the pandemic was hard, but I think that so many of our corporate partners are really starting to want to be better. And maybe it's performative, we'll see, but you know, oftentimes I think about these things because people always ask me like, oh, I don't want to be a token if I'm just the diversity hire and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, well, you go in there and you kick ass, right? So then I'm like, okay. And I'm sorry, I I didn't mean to use profanity, so I apologize. But you get the point. You just do really well. When I don't use profanity, it like just doesn't land as well. But I guess, yeah, it's just this whole idea of like, okay, even if you're inviting me in to talk about disability inclusion, and maybe to you, this is like a PR check the box type thing, but you will never forget my story about the car accident, you know, or I hope not, because I haven't forgotten. But that's what we connect on, right? We connect on that heart center. And if our hearts were able to connect in that moment when I came in and I told you that if you want to care about this and you want to care about me and you want to care about other people like me, then this is how we move this forward. So, so thanks for the question.
Do you want each of us to answer that question?
If you'd like to, absolutely.
Okay, I want to be mindful. Okay, great. Sharad, I also love that question. I love so much of what Tiffany just shared. I also think that things are getting better in the sense that people are more aware of the realities that exist. So I think for so long, people have been able to live blindly, essentially, in the different dimension of diversity and experiences that people are having. And maybe this gets to one of the questions that might come later, but I do feel like even particularly in the pandemic, folks have had to like sit in their uncomfort for a lot longer. Like they're able to read and see things on the news in ways that you might not have seen or like paid attention to as much in the past. I think ways where I've personally experienced that is I have some close friends who, as I mentioned, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, a community that's predominantly Latinx and white. And I have had conversations around race in particular with certain friends who didn't want to touch that topic with me for most of our years of friendship. And now friends are coming in a space where they are noticing, observing, and Adanta, I know this sounds crazy, but that one moment when we were X years old and you brought up this, I didn't realize that the reason why you brought that up is because it impacting you in this way. And I'm starting to realize how that's then translating to specific experiences in my workplace. And I recently read this book on X. And so I think just the fact that people are starting to want to build their awareness, and part of it is in certain spaces you have to, because it is becoming like Tiffany and Alicia were saying, like it's a lot of companies are now putting it as a priority, which it should have always been. And again, hopefully it's a priority permanently and not when the budget changes, it goes away. But I do feel a difference in the fact that at least people's awareness, and to me, that's like just the first step. So we have obviously a long way to go. Yeah, but I would say that's how I'm feeling right now. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great question. And I agree with so many things that have been said here. For me, yeah, you know, growing up, I had never heard of transgender. You know, I had no real vocabulary or experience to even describe who I was, let alone feel safe in doing that, and you know, let alone have something like a role model. You know, I didn't see any trans people in my environment, and so in that regard, the fact that, you know, I'm just able to be myself is a pretty big step forward. And the fact that there's at least some awareness that we're here is an important step, even if that awareness is still at pretty early stages and there's a lot of misconceptions. You know, but I think my yes and moment, to borrow that, would be, you know, yes, and I'm living in Seattle, which is one of the, you know, most probably one of the most inclusive cities for trans folk, and yet, you know, it's dark outside right now, and I would not feel safe to go for a walk outside, to let alone to, you know, a bar or whatever, if those were open right now, alone. That said, I think there's still some progress to be made, but thank you for that question.
Sure. That's very nice to hear, you know, that things are improving, but yes, we have a long way to go, a long way.
Yes, definitely. So I think we're going to take one more question that was put in the chat. It's a big one. So how do you deal with burnout?
This is Tiffany. I'm happy to chime in. I always just like, wait a second, because I'm like just trying to read the room, the Zoom room. So I definitely burnt out in, 2016. There's a quote that I really love that I'm just going to share here. And I said it in my latest TED Talk, and I'm going to say it wherever I go. So here's the quote. It's from someone named Francis Weller. And the quote is, "The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can I hold? That's how much gratitude I can give." So it may be kind of random why I bring that up in the context of a conversation around burnout, but I think what that quote really highlights to me is that we exist in contradictions. So in order for you to know what burnout is, you need to experience it at its depths, unfortunately, which also will lend itself to saying that will also help you determine how to create incredibly strong boundaries for yourself. The word no is something I'm still learning how to do. But these days, with regard to burnout, again, it's, at least for me, it's really setting the strongest boundaries possible I can around my time. So, so that means, I mean, this is the latest I've ever had a Zoom call in a really long time. You know, when the sun sets, I'm like, Tiffany sets. And I don't schedule any video calls or anything over the weekends. That's my time. You know, I think we're in a really interesting period where my home is my office. When I want to socialize with friends, it's on the same device that I use to do work. And so it's, again, really trying to figure out how to set those boundaries. But I will share, when I was in the depths of my burnout, I just felt like life was happening and I had no control over it. And I unfortunately, and this is me, you know, just being real, is I had to break in order to rebuild. So, so yeah, and I think someone said earlier, you need to make sure you have your cup full before you can go and fill other people's cups. And especially in this line of work, you know, and especially as women, where we have like wanting to serve tendencies, I guess I want to say, that contribute to us kind of being always in a service mindset and not doing kind of those check-ins with ourselves.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm going to jump in here because so much of what you just shared resonates with me and adds into a quote that I was going to share, because I'm also working on saying no. And I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I still have work to do. And it's interesting, this question just came up because one of my direct reports this week, and by this week I mean yesterday because it's only Tuesday, but in our one-to-one, the first thing on their agenda was, I think I'm leading to burnout. What can I do to change that? So one, I was just so proud of them for like naming that they realized they're in that space, but then we spent our whole agenda, we didn't get to the rest of the agenda because we just talked about like what are specific tips and recommendations, as one of her strengths and strength finders is achiever. And so how do we balance her wanting to have everything be 150% and also ensure that she's able to focus on other parts of her life. And so one of my favorite quotes is like, make sure that by saying yes to others, you're not saying no to yourself. And I think that's something, especially in the last like 2 years, I've just been sitting with, of like, by saying yes to that project and like yes to that dinner and like yes to this event and like yes to speaking opportunity, what was I saying no to myself, which was like cooking. I was eating a lot of cereal and milk. Sleep, I was telling myself, oh, I don't really need that much sleep, so I'm fine. Right, like all exercise. And so how was I saying no to myself? And that was then later translating and impacting me in other ways. So that's a quote that has been on my vision board actually for the last, now 3 years, because it's on my vision board now as well. So by saying like yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself. And then I recently actually, last year when I attended a panel, I heard actually someone talk about, we know about FOMO, like the fear of missing out, and they were really embracing FOMO, or sorry, JOMO, which was the joy of missing out. And I was like, yes, I love it. That's what I need to do. I need to like lean into the joy of missing out. So that made it to my vision board this year. And that's something I've been really focused on. And especially early on in pandemic when people were still, you had some friends and family who were like, no, just come over, come do this. And I was like, Adanta, nope, you're gonna be home and it's gonna be okay. And so I really pushed myself even in opportunities, like saying no to specific opportunities, whether it's catching up with certain friends or family after work, whether it's an event, whether it's a meeting. And then I think finally, and this leads to what Tiffany was saying as well, just creating those boundaries and understanding like who your people are. So I have like my personal board of directors, so specific folks and champions in my network who are my cheerleaders when I need them and the people I can vent and cry to. I cry. And it is okay to have those, and I know my people I can go to when I've had a really tough day or a tough month or a tough year, and I just need to vent and talk about those experiences and kind of do a reset. And so that has really helped me in those moments of burnout, because often we hold it all in and we're not breathing. And so I just remember, okay, I just need to breathe and reach out to the folks who can be my champions and help redirect me at times when I'm not being as healthy as I should be for myself.
Yeah, again, totally identify with a lot of what's being said here, setting boundaries. And I guess I'll close out by adding one thing, and I think it's very in line with knowing who your people are, is surrounding yourself with allies, and also not surrounding yourself with toxic people. And those individuals that take that are draining, that's going to happen in the world. They're everywhere. And so in the places where we can make choices, then for me, it's been important to exercise those choices and be with my amazing, family and network that's so supportive to me, and prioritize them. So that's just one of the ways that I avoid burnout.
Wow, thank you guys so much. And I just want to say, number one, thank you to Adanta for mentioning crying. In a past life, I might say, I'm a crier, I'm an emotional person, I'm an emotional woman. And it's like, no, I have feelings, and like things get too much, and crying is a normal human thing. So thank you for that. And from Azalea and I from GLEAM, thank you for everyone for being here. We're going to pass it back over to Mobs, and thank you to Mobs for giving us the opportunity to be here. But let me give it back over to Nancy.
Nancy, I believe you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you so much, everyone, for speaking, and all of our attendees for coming. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I know we said this would end at 7:15, but if anyone has any closing reflections, like what lessons they learned today, or they want to speak up about something that resonated with them, or anything you want to say directly to a speaker, or any final questions, please speak up now. We'll take maybe one or two just to respect our panelists' time. No pressure. Well, I'll say that I really, really loved Adanta's tip for joy of missing out. I think for myself, I agree that it's kind of tough to create boundaries during this time. And I feel like, like being first gen, I feel like I have like these responsibilities to my parents and to my family and to work. And like I have a full-time student too, and I work from home. So it's really nice to just, set those boundaries and say like, I'm not gonna, spend time with friends or not go to this event. Yeah.
I think I resonate what to Alicia said about just treating people like your friend. I feel like there's so much divide in the world, and it's just easier to be nice and not judgmental towards others. And that judgment could just, it's both harmful to yourself and your identity and what is also presented outward and what the energy that you put into the world. And I also liked Tiffany's quote about the elephant. I think that was really powerful. I can't remember it exactly, but I definitely am saving it from the chat. And thank you to our speakers so much. I have learned a lot.
So tomorrow we're going to be having an event with Coll, which is providing opportunity for women. As I mentioned, we're going to be hosting a workshop with them, and attendees who come will be able to join breakout rooms with the speakers and figure out how you too can find your own passion. These are our socials for mobs. And let's connect. If you'd like to connect with the speakers, here's everyone's LinkedIn's, our amazing panel moderators, Andrea and Azalea. I'm sorry, Azalea. Azalea's last name is Goose. So sorry about that, but you are good. And yeah, so please feel free to shuffle out, but definitely connect with us on LinkedIn, our speakers, our panel moderators, and our organizers. Thank you again, Alicia, Adanta, and Tiffany. This has been so incredible, and I can't express how thankful I am to have had you on tonight. All right, good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. And we hope to see you for the rest of the events.
Thank you so much for having us and making this happen for us. Learned so much.
Take care, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.